And good evening. Welcome to the Raleigh Municipal Light Plant Board of Commissioners meeting, 7 p.m. Just to remind you, this meeting is being audio and video recorded digitally. Tonight it'll be live on the Raleigh Community Media channel. Okay, item number 1 is citizen query, 7 to 7:10 p.m. Item number 2 is review and accept meeting minutes from previous meeting.
I see no discrepancies, Mr. Chairman. I'll give you a motion, if there's no...
Yeah, I'll just find it here. I know I
Sure.
had it a minute ago.
Yeah, well, I gave you a copy, right?
I thought you did, but I probably got it in a different file by now.
You gave a copy?
No, I've got 2 copies. I don't think I have these. I know they got signature spices on them, so.
You want my copy? You got one.
Let's get it signed from. So you made a motion? to accept
I'll make the
minutes?
motion, accept the minutes.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor of accepting the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, so we can sign up on that.
Thank you.
Ken?
Thank you.
Okay, item number 3, discussion on electric rates.
So, I think Commissioner Snow requested this to be on the agenda tonight to have a quick discussion on where Raleigh is compared to other utilities as far as electric rate goes. So what you have in front of you is the MWEC residential comparison chart as of September 2017. This is the most recent one. And you'll see that Raleigh is, you can find Raleigh on the left-hand side, probably about 3/4 of the way to the top. And you can see that the surrounding utilities in this area, Georgetown, Merrimack, Groveland does not report their data, so they're not on this chart. But Georgetown, Merrimack are pretty close to where we are in the general area. And you'll see that all the IOUs are above us. And if you check the other charts are just different kilowatt hour. So the first one is 250, the second one is 500, the third one's 750, and the fourth one's 1,000. So it just gives you the rate on as far as different kilowatt hours go. But we pretty much maintain the same spot throughout all 4 states. What I'd like you to keep in mind too is, as this was done in September, our rates have gone down about $0.015 since then.
Okay.
So if you'd like, I can give you these comparisons more often, just to give you an idea of where we're at as far as the rates go. I get them every quarter, so.
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay.
So, you know, we can talk about the comparison to, you know, Newbury, you know, then National Grid,
Mhm.
naturally, and Georgetown and even Ipswich, so.
And you'll notice that, you know, among municipal utilities, we are on the higher side, and, you know, an explanation for that would be our location in the, within the ISO territories. We're in the NEMA load zone.
Mhm.
The NEMA load zone is constrained. We've seen a lot of different forward capacity market costs that have increased substantially this year, starting in July. So that is one of the major, you know, considerations to take when you look at this, is the fact of our location in the ISO territories. Excuse me.
Thanks, Dan. If we can do it by, you know, per kilowatt hour, you know, how many cents per kilowatt hour next time?
I can, what I can do is I can just break these, I can do the division and just put a little note on the side.
Yeah.
And break these out. You want, how many utilities do you want? You want just the local ones? You want all of them, or?
Yeah, just the local ones in comparison, National Grid and everything
Okay.
else.
If you went on the National Grid website or like Eversource's website, you're gonna see you're gonna see multiple rates, because they break their rate
It
out
breaks-
into the basic service charge,
Mhm.
and then they have the transmission charge, and they have other charges on top of that. So they're broken out into maybe, you know, 5 or 6 different charges. We have one charge on the bill per kilowatt hour. They have 5. So if you look at their website, yeah, their
Yeah, it
basic
shows
service
much lower.
charge for, yeah, it's lower, but when you add all those charges together, that's why if you look at this, it's important, because it totals everything up, and it gives you a good idea of, when you look at the bill, and on a strictly per kilowatt hour basis,
Right,
we are well under them.
yes.
In the order of, let's see, National Grid is 57.78, we are at 46, so that's $9 less
Hmm.
on a 250 kilowatt hour bill. $9 a month is a good amount of money.
On a 500 kilowatt, it's 110 for National Grid, 88 for us. 750 kilowatt, 162 for National Grid, and we're at 130, so it's significantly lower. And comparable to the surrounding towns.
Yeah, especially to Georgetown, which is our neighbor, and Merrimack, which is a little bit further removed, but in the same general area.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Item number 4. I think you're up. Grab a chair there if you want.
Some introductions, I guess. Pashi, Robert Snow, Commissioner.
Nice to meet you, Posse. Posse?
Robert Murray, Chairman of the Board, and then Kenny Keys.
Good night.
Nice to see you again. And that's Eric over there.
Yeah, I'm Pasi Miettinen. I'm CEO of Sagewell. Thank you for the invite. Glad to be able to talk to you about electric vehicles and the potential for Rowley. But before I go into some of the topics that we have discussed previously, I'm curious if you wanted to set the stage for a conversation.
We, the board, and especially Commissioner Snow, has been talking recently about electric vehicles, electrical vehicle chargers, and how we're not in the market, we're not prepared for any customers who may approach us as far as charging stations, what to do about a charging station, how much they cost, and So we're not really prepared, so we'd kind of like to be out in front of this and be able to address a customer situation when they come to us, so if you want
We went, Dan and I went to the NEPA, and we went last year, and went this year. And at the NEPA conference, they talked about batteries, and, you know, they were talking about batteries, and that's really where things got hung up, because they're, you know, it's, right now, it's like 200 to 300 miles on a charge, and we've been reading about this new battery that they're hoping to go 500 miles. It's almost like a capacitor, and I forget the name of it right now offhand. But we want to be in front of this, because I think by 2022, especially by 2025, we're going to have charging stations, and we're going to see if this battery does develop the way they say it does. You know, and I think we want to educate the people.
Right. Okay. So I hear preparation, I heard capacity costs earlier. There are a lot of themes that are intersecting. I'm also curious if there have been environmental motivations or concerns expressed by residents, or carbon reduction goals, or I'm trying to think of what kind of themes come up in these conversations with residents.
I think it's been mainly, it's money. It would be cheaper.
Right.
Be more convenient. You know, going to the gas station. You know, right now there's few people, and myself in town, have hybrids.
Okay.
You know, but I think with this battery development, there's going to be a leap all of a sudden. It's going to be suddenly.
Right. Okay, very good. I'm happy to go through a few things, and obviously interrupt me with any questions. I'll try to cover a couple of topics, a little bit of context, and specifically what we're doing already with some of the other municipal utilities and investor-owned utilities also, particularly with Belmont and Braintree. Those are two programs that we've been running for a year now on electric vehicle marketing there, and we have some real-life data and real-life experience. Belmont now has a little over 100 electric vehicles, a town of 20,000 people, and Braintree is in the 60 or 70 range now.
Mm-hmm.
So those happen relatively suddenly. They've gone from about 40 vehicles in Belmont to the 100 in about a year. Braintree has gone up from about 20 vehicles to now about 60 vehicles, if I remember correctly. So there's already evolution happening, and but the interesting thing for us as a company that markets these vehicles, and then also does load management programs, has been both not just look at where are we today, but to your point, where are we going to be in the future. Also, as an electric vehicle driver myself for the past 5 years, I have a lot of first-hand experience with the cars. And the cars that are on the market today, relatively inexpensive. I'll give you a sense of, one of the things that we're doing group purchase discounts in these towns. Same thing that we're doing heat pumps. I see we have one up there on the wall. With electric vehicles, we're trying to get lower cost solutions to the residents of these towns. You can now get an electric vehicle 3-year lease at net cost. It's all the sales taxes, fees included, at $150 a month. Is one of the lowest costs, and that's a 200+ mile range Chevy Bolt, fully electric vehicle. Very inexpensive vehicle to drive also. What was I was just curious, the $1,000 kilowatt-hours a month, what is the rate?
The rate?
Oh, yeah.
1,000 kilowatts?
Yeah, 1,000 kilowatt-hours a month. I was curious what that would end up being.
It was $172.50.
So 17 cents a kilowatt-hour.
Yep.
So roughly speaking, if you drove an electric vehicle and you paid that rate, that would be equivalent to paying about $1.50 a gallon for gas. So we have a combination of, if costs are particularly interesting to people, we have vehicles that are very inexpensive to acquire, very inexpensive to drive.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people in the town should be driving these vehicles already today. They're very practical, very usable. And like I said, I've been driving mine for years now. And I have multiple cars. I don't drive the other cars. I only drive the electric vehicle. It's faster. It's a lot more fun. It's cheaper to drive. So you'll see this. People start taking advantage of actually the opportunities to drive the vehicles. They will be purchasing more and more of it. So, but let me put some context into what we've been doing. So right now, on a really macro level, it's statewide. As you were saying earlier, you might see if the state meets its goals on electric vehicle adoption. If all those cars started charging on peak, we might see as much as 600 megawatts of peak load growth. So it's important to get those vehicles to charge during off-peak. If they're charging during off-peak times and they're not contributing to the capacity cost, they have the very beneficial impact of bringing about anywhere from $300 $400 of net revenue to the utility per vehicle. So that's a vehicle that's very inexpensive for the customer to drive because it's equivalent to buying gas at $1.50 a gallon. But at the same time, that $300 to $400 per car that is bringing net revenue lowers the rates for everyone in town. So it's just important to get those cars to charge during off-peak, and if they do, they're very good for the town, and it will help you drive electric rates down. So in that sense, faster adoption is better. And the more you get the cars to come in, the faster the rates will be lowered by those vehicles. In contrast, when we look at the contribution margin or net revenue per house, it's typically in the order of about $400 to $500 a year for most of the municipal utilities that we've looked at. So what that means is that if you have a car that comes in at $300 to $400 a year, that's almost equivalent to getting one new home into your territory. So it's a very much, and also you get a carbon emissions reduction in order of about 70% compared to gasoline vehicles. So that's why a lot of people call both the heat pumps and the electric vehicles, they call it beneficial electrification. So you get environmental benefits, you get lower rates for everyone in town, you get lower costs for the customers. So I'm very hopeful that we'll see a lot of vehicles, but then you have to be prepared for what are you going to do about that. So, so all that's, I'll show you a couple of things here. Just a graph in terms of how statewide electric vehicles have been growing. So it's been growing, but not as fast as that people anticipated, but it's growing. We're currently selling about 300 cars a month statewide. And that's going pretty fast now because there are new cars coming on the market. There are currently already 86 fully electric vehicles that have been announced over the next 5 years that are going to launch in the U.S. And those are all 200 miles plus range vehicles. It doesn't include the plug-in hybrids that have both a battery and a gasoline engine. They're just a pure electric vehicle. So the cars are definitely coming. Now it's just a question what their impact is. My car charges 7.5 kilowatts. So the average household coincident peak in Massachusetts is about 1.6, 1.7 kW. So I'm already at 5 times the rate of an average house that's contributing to the peak. So if I charge during a peak, that's a bad thing. If I charge during the off-peak hours, that's good because no infrastructure needed for that. New cars are going to be charging at 11 kW now for the next generation. We already have Teslas that can charge at 18.5 kW. So capacity costs matter. Getting those cars to charge off-peak matters. So.
Can you just go into really quick, like a program you would offer a customer an incentive, I would say?
Well, the interesting thing is that one of the things that we've found is that all these vehicles are either heavily incented already. There are currently $10,000 worth of rebates available, a combination of federal and state. So what we're finding is that actually additional incentives mostly aren't needed. What's needed is awareness and marketing and outreach.
Okay, I'm sorry. I meant incentive as far as for them not to charge on peak.
Yes. So, and we have programs in place that both use hardware in case of utilities that don't have AMI meters or smart meters. And those that have smart meters, we can actually do other behavioral programs. So we can give them an incentive, and then the meter data then confirms that they're charging during off-peak.
Okay.
So we don't need any additional hardware in those cases. And it's been very successful in places like Belmont, for example. If the cars, if you don't have AMI meters or smart meters, then use of a smart charger allows us to both monitor that the customer is charging during off-peak, and we will give them an incentive, or utility gives them an incentive. Right now they're roughly in the order of about $8 a month. But that equates to almost 200 miles a month of free driving. So in a year that you can get $1,600 worth of, 1,600 miles worth of free driving. by simply just charging during the nighttime. At the same time, it costs less than that for the utility to shift that consumption. So it's a good value for everyone. So,
Okay.
yes,
Yeah, how, what's your commute? So,
mine,
yep, your.
mine is 12 miles.
12 miles.
Yes.
Okay, so, say if somebody had a, we're about 35 miles outside of Boston, they had to do a commute 30 miles close to the city and come back at night, so 60 miles.
Right.
So, and I think this is what some of the people don't understand, okay? The total charge for the vehicle would be about 300 miles
Right.
for the battery. And so, basically, they're gonna have to, probably, 5 times, but depends on other driving, shopping, and everything else.
Right.
And coming back to the house, so they're probably gonna, 4 days, 3 days, they'll require a charge.
Indeed, it would. Most people actually charge when they just come home. They
Just come home and just charge it
plug
up.
I just automatically do it. It's just a habit.
Okay,
So then you try to get them to get the charging to start later at night. They're just out of habit. You just come home, you plug it in.
and the smart cord,
Yes, and if you have a smart charger, then that can delay the charging start.
is that controlled by the utility, or is that controlled by the person?
You have both. So there are there are 3 ways of doing it. You can program your car to start charging later,
Mhm.
even though you're plugged in, it won't be charging until later.
Okay.
You can program the charger to actually start later, or the utility can actually, during peak times, for example, can actually turn the charger off or dial it down, depending on how you set the rules of the program.
How long to charge?
It all depends. I mean, my car, I get, think about this, you will get about 30 to, okay, most people will get about 30 to 40 miles of range per hour if they, with what's known as a level 2 charger at home. Okay. So if you have a 60-mile round trip, that's 2 hours of charging each day.
Okay, all right.
So, and that, and again, it depends on what the vehicle is able to take in. Some vehicles some vehicles might take 4 hours if they only charge at 3.5. Other vehicles will take an hour if they do that at 10 kW. So
And it depends on the trip.
it depends on the trip, obviously, too, of course. So those are the types of things that, from a driver experience point of view, we try to make these things as easy and good for the customers and the drivers to be able to not be impacted. They can continue driving however they want to. If they need to go somewhere farther away, they still have plenty of range after they've been to Boston and back. You still have, I mean, most of the new vehicles are in the 200-plus range miles,
Mhm.
200 to 300 miles. Only Tesla has a 300-plus mile vehicle right now. And for most people, the commutes aren't that long, or they have multiple vehicles in the house. The primary buyer of these vehicles are people who have 2 or more cars in the family. If they need to go somewhere further, they can take a gasoline vehicle,
Mhm.
or actually the other. If you have really long driving distances and really long commutes, a lot of people buy plug-in hybrids. So you have vehicles now that have about 40 miles of battery range, and then it switches to gasoline after that. So you have alternatives, and you have different ways of handling that range issue. Range issue usually, the funny thing is that the only people who ever really talk about range anxiety are people who don't have EVs because they haven't had to live with it and realize that actually
Right.
works for them, or the people who want to sell you chargers. So, because they don't even want to convince you that it's a big problem. It really isn't that big of a problem. So those are the kinds of things. In terms of getting a bigger value in terms of the residents, what we found is the opportunity to get discounted cars. So right now, our lease price, for example, for a couple of the vehicles is about 50% off from the official lease price at the manufacturer's website. So we worked with select dealers who are very competitive in terms of the pricing. And so we work with any dealer in the area, whoever wants to, who also offer to people saying, if you're willing to drive an extra 5 miles or 10 miles, you can save thousands of dollars. And just make sure that people are aware of the pricing. So very aggressive pricing on the cars. Also discounted chargers if they want to do that. But that really isn't a drive. The main issue is how do you get people to be aware of the cars, get them to drive them. So we actually don't find the load control in those aspects to be difficult. It's more about how to get as many people into the cars and get them to drive them and try them.
So is it up to the utility to basically say you're gonna buy a level 2 charger or a smart charger, or is it something, how would we, I mean, as a utility say, we want these people to have smart chargers because we
Right.
don't want them charging on peak.
Right.
So has like Belmont and Braintree incentivized the charger?
Originally, yes. In the case of Belmont, for example, there was a rebate for chargers. But now it's shifting, actually not doing that, because they also have the AMI meters. So they don't necessarily need to, they don't need to do this with the chargers. In the case of some of the utilities that don't have AMI meters, they've had rebates anywhere from ranging $100 to $250 to bridge the gap between a what's called a DOM charger versus a smart charger.
Okay.
And so it's just taking care of the price difference on those chargers. Then you get things like you get to see it on your phone, you get to see what the charging levels are, get a bunch of other data that your car doesn't necessarily provide to you. So you'll find that a lot of people who buy these cars are technically savvy to begin with. They want to have those smart chargers anyway,
Okay.
because they want to see all the data they can get on the car, so they can have a charger. So. Let me see if there are any other. Currently, I just looked up, Rowley has 3 electric vehicles that have been rebated over the last 3 years, which is not a lot. I'm assuming that there are probably more cars in town, just never applied for the rebate. But it doesn't look like there's a large vehicle population in town right now. There are plenty of commuters, there are plenty of people whose commutes are within most of the electric vehicles range. So people would be financially clearly better off if they were driving these vehicles, but clearly the awareness just isn't there because they haven't implemented those. The other things that we do, just to give you some context how to get people to test drive these cars, we arrange for test drives starting either at home or from work. They can go online in Belmont or Braintree, they can schedule a test drive online, the car comes home, we try to make it very convenient for people to try these products. Very aggressive pricing on cars, very, very aggressive, especially for these prices. And some of the purchase prices are almost 50% off because once all the rebates and discounts get applied, so pretty substantial. And those are basically the most relevant point probably for you for this conversation. Curious what other questions and what other topics might be of interest.
It's we have a T station in town as well,
Yes.
so that would be a spot for smart chargers. Besides the EV program, I mean, we would
Right.
definitely have, there's probably a need in town for charging locations.
Here's a somewhat contrarian, especially as someone who looks at a lot of data.
Okay.
And one of the things that you'll find is that public charging stations are not used very much because they're not that needed. The places where they're needed are places like workplaces where the cars stay a long time, where there are transit locations where they're traveling from longer distances, so highway locations. Places where we don't see a lot of use are grocery stores, stores in general, those are the public locations, libraries. There are a lot of chargers at those locations across the U.S. They're not used very much. Transit stations are reasonably good places. You can actually put lower charging level chargers because the cars tend to stay there a longer time, so they don't necessarily have demand impacts. There are ways to do it, but from a utility perspective, it's been difficult to earn enough revenue to cover the costs of those. So they tend to be more of a marketing expense for electric vehicles than actually it's certainly not a revenue generator for the utility. So they cost money to the ratepayers. But in terms of home charging, that's where most of the charging takes place. And level 2 smart chargers cost $600. Anywhere from $300 to $500 to install it, depending on how easy it is to put in there.
I was just thinking the commuter rail station in Raleigh here would be the place to have one. You know, if you're going to be in a public
Probably,
use.
you're right.
Not, but now would be, probably 1 or 2. But then again, You know, I don't know. You don't know about these things. People may say, oh, they have a charging station. I'll go to Raleigh to park my car, you know?
Well, the funny thing is that I have 6 or 7 stations within less than a mile away from my house. I don't use, and all of them are free. I don't use them because I'm not gonna drive my car there and
Right.
walk home. And so I'll just charge at home.
Right.
And so, I don't think that is necessarily a concern. The other thing is that, of course, people who are taking public transit, that's not necessarily the mileage. By letting those vehicles to charge at a public transit station, you aren't necessarily displacing gasoline miles, so you don't necessarily get the environmental benefits by doing that.
Right now, it looks good, looks green.
Right.
You know, but utility-wise, you know, it's just not there with people yet. Unless you worked at that location, and then, you know, perfect.
Any workplace in town certainly makes a lot of sense. It's good for the town, good for the environment, good for the town, because it's mostly morning time charging until the batteries are full, so they don't contribute to the peak in the afternoons. They're very good for attracting employees. A lot of companies like to put them in because they get a certain type of employee who they value. So a lot of different reasons. So workplace charging we see valuable, home charging we see as particularly valuable. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
I don't think there was anything else I had, so, go ahead.
I'm just gonna ask one, have you heard anything about this new battery that they've been talking about? Tesla has been looking at it. I'm trying to think of the other fellow's name who's been working on it. It's almost like a capacitor type of battery.
Yeah, there've been a lot of discussions about various technologies. We haven't been really concerned about the future technology developments. We've been most concerned about finding the customers who can use the cars as they are today.
Right.
And trying to get as many of those people to buy those cars as possible. The range and other features will improve, but we're mostly focused on what can we do today with today's technology and finding the customers.
But I mean, I'm just looking at it, once they have a 600-mile battery and they have an instantaneous charge, that changes the dynamic completely.
It
of
will-
electric vehicles.
Yeah, and it will also charge the dynamic for the utility, because
Yes.
right now we're looking at potentially up to 350 kW chargers. The fast chargers are already at 150 kW, and that's a 20 to 30-minute charge. Taking it any higher, you're looking at very expensive installs. And I'm not sure that the business models and the business cases are there in the near term. So home charging tends to be where all the activity is from the utility perspective today.
So what would be our next steps if we were interested in some kind of program or incentivizing charges, smart charges, or
Right.
where would we go from here?
We'd be happy to sit down and talk through the options and look at the customer base a little bit more in detail. Obviously, you have a relatively small customer base, so the question would be what could be done with a group of utilities in the area, because then you would also represent a larger pool of potential customers, the dealers. That will help get lower prices for cars. So a lot of benefits from actually working together with a few utilities. And so we would probably have a conversation about, okay, what would be the level of interest here, and then what would some of your peer utilities, and seeing if there could be something that could be arranged to create a group-wide effort to share the costs of any programs and activities.
Okay. From the conversation we had on the phone, the marketing can be quite expensive for this type of program, so.
Indeed, and that's one of the primary reasons why it makes sense to look at cost sharing, because the infrastructure to serve Rowley versus Rowley plus 3 or 4 other utilities is largely the same. So then the question becomes, if you can get other utilities to participate in the area, then if that will drive the per utility cost down quite a bit.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I think
All
we're
right.
all set.
Very good.
Give us something to think about.
Yeah.
Thank you, I appreciate the time, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm sure we'll have this conversation again. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night now.
Interesting.
It's interesting.
So would the board be, how do you want me to proceed with this? You just want me to have a conversation with him one-on-one and see what other utilities may be interested for a pool of different utilities, or how do you wanna?
Yeah, it's, there aren't that many automobiles, salespeople close around here.
Well, I would say that if you, because when we had a conversation on the phone, he said any dealer within 10-mile radius. And if you think of that, I mean, you go to Amesbury, there's Amesbury Chevrolet, there's
Mhm.
Ipswich Ford, there's, and I'm not even sure what other ones are on, but I'm sure there's a few more. Newburyport must have.
There's a couple of them.
Right, so when you look at it that way, and if we did partner with another utility, or even two, let's say a Middleton or a Danvers or somebody like that, then now you move that pool a little bit further, so you enter the Danvers dealers, and you enter, so the pool grows quite a bit. So,
I think it's good to have the discussion, you know, and people at home can listen, and I think a lot of people probably, you know, a lot of the questions they had get cleared up. They probably have a lot more questions now too, but I think it's a beginning, and it's a good dialogue to continue. And,
well, because like I said, the way to look at this is going forward, it will, and as you said, Bob, it will be here. It's just a matter of when and if we're ready for it, because we don't want to be catching up. We'd rather be out ahead of it if we can. If you have the smart charges in place already, then you're not looking to basically, if you don't know people are buying the cars and they're installing these charges, it's going to affect your peak if you get enough of those in town.
Right.
So if we're out ahead of it, we can basically, avoid that situation by getting the smart charges in, incentivizing them, so that customers, so they're not creating a new peak at.
We've got to kind of be the ones that control the actual charge.
Right.
Exactly.
and I think, you know, people sitting home listening tonight, there'll be one or two, maybe more, that will sit there and say, you know, maybe an electric vehicle is the way to go because of my commute. Let me think about my commute, and that's what's going to drive it. And then they'll say, well, what's the cost, you know, to me to run an electric vehicle? And then they look at, you know, as you were saying, it's equivalent to about $1.50 a gallon. And, you know, the price of gasoline goes up, and all of a sudden, you know, people get driven to, you know, a more economical
Mm-hmm.
vehicle. So that, all these factors play in.
For sure. So I will have another conversation with him, and we'll proceed as maybe, see what other utilities or municipalities are interested, and we'll go from there, I guess. We'll keep it on the radar screen as it was. As it is.
Thanks for bringing them in, Dan.
I'll go and get them. You ready for them?
740,
740?
yeah. 740.
Are we ready?
Here?
Sure, yeah.
How about presenting on that screen over
If you like I said, I haven't used that before, so I don't know if it's a simple plug-in or.
Hi.
Oh.
Hi there.
Hi,
That's it. Thank you.
I've got an adapter for the
Oh, you do?
HDMI.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank goodness for you.
Just
Jay.
gonna have the tech guys come in and
Yeah, oh, yeah.
straighten this out.
Gotta go down the basement. Pretty special.
Need help, Jake?
I just need to find the remote.
So we can do some introductions with Steve Poons. This is Robert Snow, Commissioner.
Steve, nice to meet you.
Robert Murray, the Chairman of the Board, and then Kenny Keys, Commissioner.
Well, I'm with Dynamic Energy Networks, I'm a vice president. I work on development of microgrids and energy storage and solar projects. And so I've got a lot of background in doing it for a while. Been in the energy business for over 40 years. Been working on microgrids for the last 13 years. Kind of understand, designed 61 or 62 microgrids. I've built several, mainly in California. I've been working in the East as well.
So let me change the input. Second. Alright, that's fine.
The last time I used a Jake, I used a stick.
Do you know where the stick is? 'Cause I thought-
No, I'm talking about, I used a thumb drive.
Oh,
I
just
have it.
directly into it?
I have a thumb drive.
We've usually just used a
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. I just need to find the button to change the
What's your
input.
presentation on thumb drive?
Uh-huh.
Oh,
Alright.
right in the back there.
Okay.
Oh,
That'll work too.
That I haven't done, so.
Try it.
It's all good until the batteries go dead.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Can try that.
Hmm.
There was a pull-down menu the last time I did it. I suppose the last time I did it was like 7 months ago.
It turns on and off.
Is this interfering with it since it's plugged in?
There we go.
It shouldn't be.
It's trying to sync up.
Open input
Alright.
list.
That's what you want.
Yeah.
HDMI 3.
Jake?
There it goes.
Oh,
Great.
Give me 1 second.
Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. It's about as- Okay, it's about as big as we're gonna get it.
That works.
All right, so, little, I think you all know this is off of Weathersfield, this whole property, so we're gonna talk a little bit about the technology and then I'm gonna, Dan had mentioned that you all are taking a look at some energy storage and trying to gather some information on that, so I've got some experience in that, so I've added a couple slides on that just to, as an information thing. And I do recommend that down the road with the Raleigh Solar, if this all goes forward, that some energy storage is probably needed to go along with it. And that's because of the variability associated with solar. And when you have a large amount, my experience is working in California where you may have 50 or 60% of the generation being from solar, energy storage is a good thing. So the layout here off of Weathersfield, now this is a layout for 6 megawatts on Bonnie and Barbara's property. And you can see the roadways coming in all around, and then the blue areas are panels. And the panel arrangement looks something like this. So it's a 3x6 arrangement. Let me talk a little bit about that. So these are set up on not a 4-stanchion, but a 2-stanchion pedestal arrangement. They're pilings driven into steel pilings driven in, and it's a rack that sits there with 2 pedestals. And what that does, that promotes the use of the ground underneath by having that, by just going with 2 pedestals. But it's an array of, you take most of the panels that you see them vertical, right? 2 foot wide, 4 foot tall. And in this arrangement, the best thing so it can better follow the lay of the land and everything is we lay them down in landscape. And then we do 3 up and 6 wide. So it's 18 panels in a rack. We're using a 400-watt paddle from LG. It's a really good panel. It's got a lot of experience out there on the ground. One of the things that we are doing a little differently is we're using an 11-degree tilt. I think the pilot project here is a 20-degree tilt. And so always there's some concern about snow and snow sicking on it. But the team that I had evaluate this, they looked at that difference. And we would experience about a 10% production loss in January and February with the snow loading by going to an 11% over a 20 or a 30-degree angle. But the fact that we're laying it over more flat, we can put them closer together, and that enables us to kind of pack it into a smaller area, which is real compatible to this property to keep it out of the wetland setbacks that are on the property. So it allows us to pack the solar panels in a little tighter so that we can get maximum production out of a smaller area of land. So each of these is going to be about 6 foot wide and about 24 foot long on that. Got it. So I have to keep it from doing that. When we look at this from a 6 megawatt perspective, the whole area, including the roads, and so all of this use of land here is about 17 acres. Okay, and the panels are actually covering about 13 acres of that. So the other 4 acres is taken up in the access roads and the spacing between the panels. Now, another advantage of laying the panels over more flat, like the 11 degrees, is it diminishes the requirement to have more, to take more of the forest. Okay, because what it's doing, we've done the analysis, and we're only seeing about 1.9% shading loss as a production loss. So that's good. And that part of that, not all of it, but part of that is the fact that we're able to lay it over more and let it be more vertical or horizontal, actually. There would be, with the 6 megawatts, there's going to be 4 transformer stations all on the property, and there'll be 8 inverters. Each inverter is a 770 kW inverter. So when we're taking a look, this is kind of the monthly production schedule that you would see out of this plant. What we're, and Dan and I have talked about, and Raleigh peak load roughly 11 megawatts. Minimum load maybe seeing around 5 megawatts. Maybe it might be a little conservative, but something like that. But I think it's important to note that this at its peak, most peak days, it's going to run about 4.5 megawatt is its output between 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. So it'll, as the load in the area goes up on a typical day, so does the production from the solar, so it'll kind of track with that. And it can continue to offset some of the purchases that you'd have to make from ISO New England. Now, when you start, and this is, I'm going to get into a little bit of the energy storage, but when you start looking at this 4.5 megawatts in the, in that zone of 5 to 11, that's pretty good penetration, and that's one of the nice things that you can see from using energy storage. So based on what we're looking at, first phase of 2 megawatts, we would only need about 350 kWh of energy storage. So that would be these 2 units. So you're looking at each of these units is about half of a refrigerator in size. So if you had a double door refrigerator, it'd be like the freezer section. Okay, each of those. So those, it'd be 2 or 3 of those, and we would put those. Here, let me just turn. It's off. These could easily go inside another facility that maybe is there for the transformers and the inverters, or we just stick it in the barn that's on the property. And that can be done.
And that's 350 kilowatts?
On the low end for the 2 would be around 350 kilowatt hours. Now, so a lot of folks think that you have to have a lot of energy storage when you're talking about solar, but you're not trying to offset everything. What you're trying to do is get the unpredictable or the intermittency associated with the solar from a unpredictable situation to a predictable situation, something that you can handle. And in my experience, I was part of the Oahu Wind Integration Transmission Study with the Department of Energy and HECO, Hawaii Electric, and oh gosh, we had everybody. Commission was involved and everything. And that was a 3-year effort. But one of the key things we learned, this was trying to bring 600 megawatts of wind from Molokai and Lanai, a submarine cable 80 kilometers over to Oahu. And one of the things we learned was it only takes about 2 to 5% of the total renewable capacity in the form of energy storage to mitigate all the smoothing efforts or all the variability that you need. Okay, so you don't have to if you got 2 megawatts of solar, you don't need 2 megawatts of energy storage. You need something much smaller. And then there's some modeling techniques that you can use to figure out what that best fit is. So what I see happening, or the best use of the energy storage, is never just for one thing, but for multiple things. I call it a utility infielder. The energy storage can play multiple roles, and you can always schedule it and set it up to do that. So solar smoothing, you can also set it up for load smoothing. But I haven't, from the data, I haven't seen much need for that, but it is there. Maybe something associated with the business park. It might have some variability in its load, and you can address that with energy storage. Peak shaving and reduction, I'm going to give you an example of that. And then in concert with that, you can use it to support voltage and frequency on the distribution network, which is a nice little asset. You can do power factor correction. When I use energy storage in a microgrid, most of the loads are induction-based loads, or motors and pumps and things like that. And the typical power factor for those was about 0.8 power factor. And with energy storage, we typically correct that to 0.985. So you can get, and that's just something you can do in the background all the time, is do that power factor correction, which can be an asset if you have on your network, if you have a load that's particularly challenging to your power factor and ends up in causing issues around your reactive loads on your network. And you can fix that with a fairly small
You're
energy
talking about
storage.
running large electric motors,
Yeah.
like pumps.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also a nice thing about energy storage is in relationship to pumps. You know, you get that starting surge and things like that,
Yep.
which can wreak havoc on a distribution system inside a building or even on a smaller electric distribution system. With a utility, these things are pretty adept at mitigating that. One of the things you can do, that 350 kW will take, you can run it up to about 1.4 megawatts, so 4x, for about 15 minutes. These lithium batteries, they are not real susceptible to problems in discharge. They like to be slowly charged, but you can just move them all over the place in discharge. So we commonly use that flexibility to address starting surges and things like that, especially where there's a larger facility that has multiple motors, either in process or in air handling equipment. It can just handle it. So that's one of the things that's also nice about it. So here's an example of PV smoothing, and this is a part of a project we did in San Diego, and this is the normal PV. You know, and you would think in San Diego it's always sunny, you know, not many clouds, and things. But there's a lot of variability. That's the green line in the in this. It is the solar, and then we correct it after applying the energy storage to in a PV smoothing or a solar smoothing.
Can you explain PV smoothing? Because we have a lot of people at home
Okay.
watching this too.
All right, so
Thank you.
so PV, you know, it increases in the morning and then falls off in the evening, right? But that's an oversimplification. It's more like this. So it's just real variable, okay? That's just the nature of it, okay? Some of that or a lot of that's related to clouds or different densities that are flowing in the air. You know, it's just all kinds of things affect that. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing if it's small enough within an electric system that just manages it in the background. Or if it's in a larger situation like this, where you have more penetration more PV penetration on a circuit, you want to maintain circuit stability. And so so you have to do that. This is a situation at off of a circuit that we were working on, and this was a particular customer's load. It's a long radial feeder it's about 8 megawatt on that feeder, and it had 45% penetration of PV, distributed PV, so PV everywhere. And we put 3 25 kW units at strategic locations on that long radial feed and smoothed it out. So 8 megawatts, but we only used 75 kW to smooth that out. So that was a system that we did with the California Energy Commission and with San Diego Gas and Electric on one of their deep penetration circuits that they had. And it had commercial facilities and it had residential facilities on that circuit. So it's a mixed use circuit. So it was really, really helpful. So that's what I'm talking about. You're just smoothing all that variability that's in that type of generation, which is the photovoltaic. All right. And then another thing that we used very much in Borrego Springs, which is a desert community. This is a circuit that in the middle of the day has about 2 to 2.5 megawatts of demand, but there's 800 kW of PV on that circuit. So that's about a third. So about 33% penetration of renewables on that circuit. And one of the things that was necessary on this circuit on some of these hot days, this circuit peaked at 4.6 megawatts at midnight because there was a ton of pumping load. So there's produce farms on this circuit, and they did their pumping at night because they were on a night pumping rate. And then the water district also had pumps, that, and they were also pumping at night. So the real problem was at night on this circuit. In the daytime, we had this, but it was really key is that on the hot summer days, 122 degrees, there's a single transmission line, 69 kV line that comes out through the forest in San Diego County, over the mountains, and then down runs across the desert. And they have terrible reliability with that line, especially when it gets hot. So the idea, there's 3 circuits. They were trying to limit it, each circuit, to 2.5 megawatt load. So we used our energy storage and said, never let it get above 2.5 megawatts. Okay, and so that's what this is showing, how the energy storage was programmed to basically clip the need through the substation and just let the energy storage pick up the slack. Now, the economic implications of that is that you can do the same thing in a market-based system, like here, is that it can help you manage just exactly what you're bringing in from MISO New England. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. Any questions? Anything on the project itself, the solar project?
Well, I have a question mostly on the battery storage. Have you done, or have you looked at the ISO New England market as far as what we could do? Basically, that instance right there that's on the TV is on peak shaving, and what the cost benefit is for this utility as far as peak shaving goes.
Yeah, I haven't looked at this specific situation, but we have looked at this in the PJM territory, and then obviously in CAISO. And but I can tell you that from a peak shaving perspective, you won't be able to justify the cost of the energy storage just on that use case. But if you're using it to smooth some PV and doing some peak reduction or peak capacity capping like this, and you're using it to do some power factor correction, when you start getting when you're able to utilize it in 3 or 4 different ways during a 24-hour period, that's when it pencils.
Okay.
So that's the key, is not if somebody's coming in and telling you that they can make it pencil with just one application. I have never seen that work, with the exception of frequency regulation in the PJM market.
Okay. And following that question would be islanding and microgrid. I've seen other utilities do a program where they use battery storage to supply critical loads. Now, if you're only talking about a 300 kWh battery, then you're not going to be talking about something that's going to be able to supply a police and fire station, is I guess what I'm getting at. It's critical infrastructure.
To use it as a backup?
To use it, yeah, an islanding or basically a, what's the term? Not mini grid.
And sometimes they talk about
Microgrid.
A nanogrid or
Nanogrid, microgrid, yeah, basically. Have you seen that as far as battery storage being used in that application?
I've built microgrids with energy storage in them for islanding capabilities.
Okay.
But not to use the energy storage as a replacement of a a diesel engine or a gas engine that's set up for backup operations, not to replace that, because you have just a certain amount of capacity. So it's not really a generator, and it shouldn't be looked at as a generator. It's a grid device. So it makes everything else better. So for example, if you had a fire station and police station, let's say they live together in a single building, and it has a gas generator as a backup, and you only intend to use that as a backup, that's fine. You get into, but you have PV on the roof, energy storage in that setup, then you're going to be using the PV and the energy storage all the time. But when you go into an island, because the grid is down, that can still operate. But it would be in conjunction with that backup generator. And what you would do is you would program it such that whenever the PV's out, it's filling the battery and also supplying load. And then when the PV falls off in the evening, then you're going to be using the battery and the backup generator through the night to do the work.
Okay.
Now, what's nice about the battery in that situation is it will reduce the amount of gas usage or diesel usage that you have, because you're going to use up the energy of the battery first before you do that. But it also gives you the ability to smooth the PV, and therefore you're not running into situations where the PV is fighting the backup generator if they happen to be on at the same time.
Okay.
It also enables you, from a simplification of the interconnection, it enables you to have a very, very safe approach to the interconnection. That point of common coupling, because you can set up basically a two-switch control, where the outboard is controlled by the utility like yourself. The inboard is part of the microgrid, and it does the resynchronization to the grid once the grid comes back.
Okay.
So it's greatly simple, and you can set that all up with the outboard switch or breaker having a reverse power trip, so that you make sure you're doubly defensed against putting power back on the grid when you don't want it on the grid.
Right.
So there's things that you could do
Okay.
on that. Yeah, I could talk to you all day about that.
Okay, all right, yeah.
But
Okay.
there's a lot of flexibility associated with energy storage. Just have to apply it right, or else it doesn't pencil. That's all.
Was it Delton Sterling?
Yeah,
They-
Sterling did that, yeah.
What was it, 2 meg?
I believe it was, 1 or 2, I can't remember which, but it was a large battery.
It solved their problem, I think,
Yeah,
for the peak loads.
It will do that. Any other questions I can help you with?
probably not right at the moment, but I'm
Okay.
sure we'll have something.
No problem.
There's a lot of discussions that we need to have
Mhm.
going forward, so.
Well, please don't be afraid to ask, down the road, ask questions. I'm happy to help.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Don't forget your stick. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
So we're on to 6?
Yep.
Rowley Solar LLC update.
I just wanted to give the board an update on where the solar project is. I know there's been some miscommunication with the selectmen as far as what's going on with the department, and Commissioner Snow and myself had a conversation about this. There is a PPA and IA signed with the developer who's here tonight. That's been signed for probably a month now. I know we have talked about this in the past in different meetings, so that is signed. As far as an update to that, the developer has approached me about increasing the amount of megawatts to the original agreement, communicating there's a couple of edits we need to do to the PPA as far as removing some of the original manufacturer specs in that, so we're working on that. And also the developer approached me about working on maybe increasing the cost of the PPA price. But we are talking through that, and we'll get into that as far as that goes. The developer and I will have that discussion.
When we did other solar projects, okay, we had a pilot, as I remember,
Yes.
and as we went forward.
Well, you see, that's where I've got to kind of separate us from the town. The pilot is between the developer and the town. It's really got nothing to do with the light department, per se.
Okay.
It's a negotiation between the developer, I believe the town assessor, and the actual selectman. So it's really, it affects the project, where the project has to kind of figure that cost into their price so that they actually cover it. So the developers kind of got to know what that price is so they can.
Okay. Would we require a tri-board meeting? I'm not sure.
Not necessarily, I know we
Discuss
didn't.
this.
We didn't have a tri-board meeting when Central Street Solar did
Right.
their pilot. They negotiated that pilot with the town assessor. The town assessor, they negotiated that, then it went up before town meeting to be voted on. We didn't have a tri-board meeting as far as that goes.
Okay.
I mean,
This is just a little different project.
it's a little, and one of the other things with this project is, and Bonnie can attest to this a little bit, she's talked to you about this before, it's a community solar project. So it's a little different from Central Street. Actually, it's a lot different from Central Street because Central Street, it's a very basic solar project. We buy the output from the array, end of story. The pilot's negotiated with the town, end of story, that, it's done. The landowner has a lease with the developer, and that's pretty much it. With community solar, and with the developer, they're selling all the power to Raleigh Light Department, so we're buying all the power. A customer can, and maybe this would help, I received a letter, I think I emailed this to you before the meeting. This is the letter from the DOER that we received.
Yes.
So I emailed it to the board, I believe, I don't know, last week, maybe the week before.
Right.
A community solar project is, we offer this to our ratepayers as part of an incentive to get them to buy into the solar, to renewable energy. The customer will pay us a fee on a certain percentage of the project. So they'll pay us a certain amount every month. But after the first year, what we'll do is we'll consider the transmission savings, the capacity savings that we get from having this solar array online, and we'll credit the customers for that amount of avoided cost that we get off of our bill to the ISO New England. The customer will get that on their percentage share of the project. So they'll get, let's say their charge, I think it was like $5 a month for their charge. The transmission cost savings could be in the relationship of maybe, I'm just using round numbers, $10. So the actual credit to the customer will be $5. So you take the charge minus the credit of $10 gives them a credit of $5 for the month. So the customer would see that credit on their bill.
What about, we talked about some other towns around here that have done this.
Reading has done this,
Reading
yes.
has done this. And how did that project, how does that project work? Does it basically work the same way?
We're gonna base our model on their model with a
Okay.
few small tweaks in it because they break out similar to National Grid, they break their bill out into transmission cost, conservation cost, regular kilowatt hour cost, so they break their bill out. We don't. So in order, we can't do what they did as far as their program goes because they took a certain portion of their bill and then they credit the customer for that. We can't do that because we don't break our bill out. So we can't take a portion of it and credit it because we don't know what that portion is. We just charge a base rate. So what I did in this project is took our wholesale cost minus that, and that would be the charge to the customer. So whatever the wholesale cost is for the month, that it runs about 4 to 5 cents would be the charge to the customer. The voided cost would be the transmission, so the credit would be on the other side.
Is there any kind of legal, anything on our side to be done legally?
Well, it would be, yes, we would have to basically come up with which this is what I want to talk to tonight is, this is in the beginning stages of the project. The program, very basic program, has been adopted by DOER or accepted by DOER, but it's not a confirmation of the exact program. So us as a department and a board need to come up with basically a policy that describes exactly what we're going to do. So we as a board need to have that discussion to come up with that policy, and I would run that through legal and make sure everything passes the legal test in order for us to get the program. Then we would vote, similar to what we did with the net metering policy, we would vote on that policy. It would become something that then we would offer to the customer.
So we would look at that next meeting or the meeting after?
Probably the next meeting or the meeting after, yes. We would need to get it done fairly soon because the project is slated to go online in March. So we would need to have this discussion sooner than later.
What's your time, and then we have to go to town meeting to accept it, correct?
The only thing has to be accepted at town meeting would be the pilot. Nothing that the light department does has to be accepted at town meeting.
Okay.
So anyway, like I said, if you want to add anything, Bonnie, I mean, now,
I think you did a fabulous job. You pretty much explained to the commissioners where we're going, the work that you are taking on, and then we will be able to continue to move forward. Yes, our goal, we'll use the template, pretty much the same body of the pilot agreement language that's been vetted by Rowley's legal counsel for this project. It's pretty basic. What we're working on with Sean McFadden, the assessor, is the amount, and that's based upon kilowatt hours in production. And it folds back into the equipment that we're using. And when we began the process, the equipment we originally was going to use was different than what we explained tonight, where we are essentially likely to go with LG. So, and the description of the panels and the arrangement that we showed tonight. So we need to fold those numbers into production numbers over a course of a year, provide that to Sean, and then he'll do his work, nothing to do with us, and then communicate, I believe, with the select board. And then something may or may not be adopted.
Do you have to go before the planning board?
We are actually in a double meeting tonight. We'll be leaving in a moment. We're on at 8:30,
And
site plan review.
Conservation?
Did that, and we're on the agenda for the next meeting with Conservation January 2nd. And we have some we've done some very good engineering based upon changing our equipment and our ability, as you may have understood, we're able to put a much more significant array in a much more compact area, which for us with the farm is fabulous. And also to keep our agricultural use underneath, just by changing the equipment. So we're quite pleased, and I think Conservation Commission may also be pleased. Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
that's another venue. That's-
Yeah.
Yeah,
But-
well,
I know.
Thank you.
I am overflowing with, I apologize if it's too verbose,
No,
but, so we're gonna leave, and if there's
Okay.
any questions or anything,
Yeah, I'll give you a shout if we have
thank
any
you for your
questions.
time, we appreciate it, and, we'll be in touch.
Okay.
Thank you for your support, bye.
So, continuing the discussion more on what Steve presented earlier too is on the 6 megawatts. I've been in a lot of discussions with the developer about how we can do this. Because if you look, and Bob, you'll understand where I'm coming from. If you look at the production and you look at Raleigh's load, Ed, that is one thing, but if you look at the production, you look at what we've already signed for long-term contracts, it doesn't gel, because what we've already signed up for contracts, we're hedged for the next 2 years to like 85%. So which means we've signed up contracts,
Mhm.
guaranteed contracts, where we have to take so much electricity from these contracts, and we have to pay for that. So what we don't want to do is get into a situation where we sign too many contracts, we
Right.
get too much electricity in, we can't use it all. So what happens is we must take all of it. So we take all of it in, and now we have too much. We didn't have enough load to cover all those contracts. I'm more for the, so now we have to sell it. We have to sell it out into the grid. And it may not be a physical thing where we're not using enough electricity.
Right.
It may be more of just a financial thing where we just bought too much, now we have to sell it out. So depending on the day, it may be a good thing, it may be a really bad thing, depending on where the market is on the particular day that they call it oversubscribed. If you're oversubscribed on a day where the market's $1,000 a megawatt hour or kilowatt hour, that's great, because you're selling it and you're making money, because you're selling it in. So let's say you're selling it in at 10 cents. Well, you're making a lot of money on that, all that. But let's say the market's at 4 and you're selling it at 10 cents.
Right.
Now you're buying all that power, you still have to buy it all, and now you're selling it at a loss.
Right.
That's not where we want to be.
No,
So we have to be very careful, and I have to talk to a lot of different people as far as how and if we can make this work on the size of the project. Because phase one is the 2 megawatts, the community solar, that's phase one. The next phase would be getting the phase one to, as Bonnie would say, the 5.99 megawatts. That's be the second phase, so the second phase would be 3.99. If it happens, that's what, basically we're gonna have to be careful about how we do it, if we can do it.
And the other thing we talked about, we used about 11 meg in July.
That, you see, and it brings up a good point, and I'm sorry, I wanted to kind of talk about that, is that 11 megawatts is on a peak day at 4 in the afternoon.
And-
Or even late, sometimes even later, sometimes 5 in the afternoon.
And we talked about generation, and we talked about battery storage.
Well, in
Yeah.
solar is not peaking at 5 in the afternoon.
Right.
Especially in the shoulder months where the sun is setting 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, solar is close to being offline. So that solar it's not a one-to-one relationship where the solar is peaking and now you're at your peak for ISO New England. It's not the same hour, so you're not getting all the benefit from the solar. So that has to be looked at as well.
Would this help at that, as we talked about in the summer months, we were talking about putting up like 2 meg in.
Mm-hmm.
And just to cut that 2 meg in, at that particular time when we were going to peak up and over the 11, okay?
Right.
And we were trying to keep it down to something like 9 meg, so that we didn't go over. And we have to pay more, and then we'd have to pay this, for the rest of the year at that rate.
Right. Exactly. It would, if the timing's right,
Right,
if the sun is out, because as you peak, so our peak starts off low. I mean, our base load, 2 megawatts maybe at night.
Mhm.
So as 7 o'clock starts to ramp up, 9 o'clock it starts to ramp up, then it peaks out maybe 2 and stay 2 or 3
Right.
stays up there. What solar does is it takes that peak and you still start rising in the morning, but it starts to flatten out a lot earlier. Because as the solar comes on, it'll flatten your peak out sooner.
so, and with a solar project, would you use battery storage to offset the peak?
That's the key, is using the battery storage, and that's kind of what I was trying to get across to Steve, is when you look at the ISO New England market,
Right,
especially the forward capacity market, they're billing us on our coincident peak with ISO New England's peak.
Mhm.
So whatever we're peaking at when ISO peaks is what they're billing us on for the forward capacity market cost. So if we can shave our peak by using, and a good instance is Sterling, how they did the battery storage, they turn that on when they're approaching that peak level.
right,
So they're keeping, instead of going way up, they're actually shaving it so the battery comes on and they level that
Right.
peak out. So they're not hitting the new peak. It works in ISO New England forward capacity market, it works on your ICAP peak, and it works in your National Grid, your RNS transmission peak, which is billed, that's on a monthly basis, not on a yearly basis. It would help, it would definitely help, yes. Battery storage is one of those things that, and they don't penalize you. We talked about generation, gas-fired generation,
Mhm.
and how that when we turn that gas-fired unit on, we would get that ISO peak, and we would be able to take that off of that ISO peak, but we'd be reconstituted on our transmission peak.
right,
There is no reconstitution on battery storage.
battery storage, okay.
So you get the full benefit of that battery storage where you don't get it on gas-fired generation. That's a huge difference.
Would this project have the battery storage, or we have the battery storage?
We can, that's what we need to look at.
Okay,
It could be in conjunction. Another benefit to having a solar project with battery storage is the state looks at that and says, wow, you're really doing a very green project by combining those two elements.
right,
So the state looks very favorable on that type of project, so that may be something that the developer looks at as well.
okay. Got a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, there's a lot going on with, and there's a lot of things I need to talk to different people about. The state is offering a lot of grants right now for battery storage, so there's something that we really need to be in, communicating with the state agencies, DOER, and
What would be the battery storage, 2 meg?
depending on, I don't know, that's a good question, and that I would have to get some more definitive numbers to Steve. He would have to analyze those numbers, or what legal counsel suggested would be anything that they do, because he's on the developer side,
Right,
would be to have our own engineer look at the numbers and look at his numbers and work together to come up with something that's beneficial to the light department
yes,
and the developer.
okay,
Not just let the developer run the show and say, well, this is what you need, this is what you should buy, and so have our own firm looking at that and saying, no, you don't need that, you need this, and kind of coming to a mutual agreement as far as what we need.
okay.
But there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen for the original 2 megawatt project, that's pretty much set. There's some final things we need to go over, but because that project has to be online for March, or I think it's March deadline, 2018. So, but the additional 3.99, I don't think has to be on by March. It just needs to be in the queue. So.
It'll be interesting,
Yes.
particularly when they start growing the mushrooms.
In the shade.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
I believe, I think that was it. Yeah, that's all I had for the agenda, unless you have any questions or.
It'll be interesting to see what the planning board comes up with, because there is some question, you probably realize that the woods out there are not their property.
Okay.
You get it, but somebody else owns it. And that's why they decided, well, we'll just put in mushrooms. So they'll put the panels in and put the mushrooms in, I guess, I don't know, so they could be
Agricultural farm.
which now gives them a whole new thing that they can do.
Yeah.
Uh,
You know, we've dealt with these people before, and we're still paying the price for it.
I don't,
Mr. Coleman is one.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what-
So, yep, I've got nothing else on the agenda, so.
Okay,
Give me a motion to adjourn?
I'll second it.
motion made and second to adjourn, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?